Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to another micrographics webinar. So we are an Autodesk partner and reseller. My name is Zenofin Masipa, and I will be presenting this webinar today, 18th December 2025. So I'm an application engineer with micrographics, and today's topic is unpacking urban analysis using Autodesk Forma and ArcGIS. Okay, so in this introductory chapter, we'll unpack the challenges faced when doing urban analysis by designers, be it urban planners, urban designers, or architects. Then we'll unpack the current workflow patterns, what it looks like. Then what we do is we'll shift into the proposed solution and the objectives of this webinar. Okay, so looking at the current challenge. So the world is rapidly changing. Design and planning are no longer just about creativity, visuals, or aesthetics. They are about deeply understanding how projects interact with its real world environment. We face massive global challenges, including rapid urbanization, a decline in biodiversity, and the urgent need to address climate change. Because of these complexities, design actions today often create unintended consequences. Without the right data, we risk creating problems like wind tunnel, urban heat islands, or building on sites prone to flooding or perhaps wildfires, depending on where you are. Simultaneously, our communities rely on infrastructure such as housing, safe water, and roads. And this infrastructure is often aging and crumbling. We are tasked with designing new assets or retrofitting old ones to withstand a changing climate and shifting social needs. While coming up with a design solution, there are various project requirements from both the client who owns the site, the local authority who approves the plans, and then sustainability requirements which ensure the longevity of the design. As the designer, it becomes quite complex to juggle all of these things, and the important part then is for the designer to understand all of the needs and requirements from all the stakeholders early on. So when we look at the current workflow, so starting a project typically tends to be the hardest part. Urban designers, architects must juggle site analysis, regulatory compliance, and environmental factors while trying to be creative. Defining the scope and limitations of a project without good data is incredibly difficult. Traditionally, professionals have relied on limited or outdated information. The information would usually be available on different portals, different formats, and also come to you in different intervals. This has led to a workflow being historically fragmented. Designers would often have to bounce between separate software packages, one for your static maps, another for your analysis or your visuals, and then a third one most possibly for your 3D modeling or 3D visualization. This fragmentation creates blind spots, so you tend to miss critical constraints, be it a specific zoning boundary, a floodplain which might not be visualized or unpacked early on, and the designer only becomes aware of this late in the process. This leads to costly rework or missed opportunities. And when we say costly rework, not costly rework while the drawing is on the drawing board, but while the project is perhaps in its construction phase, or or once it's in its operational phase and there needs to be amendments because the design was not suitable for the floods that in the area, or in the instance of missed opportunities, um, looking at the instance perhaps of the the floodplain, the design could have perhaps been done in a manner to where it still acts as a flood control mechanism, but in periods where there's no flood, then it also behaves as an interactive space where people can use this flood control mechanism. Okay, so the solution. So firstly, we look at evidence-based design, and what we propose here is the solution to integrate Forma, which is the conceptual design, and ArcGIS, which is the geospatial intelligence. This allows us to answer high impact questions immediately. Where should the building go? How big should it be? What will this choice mean for people and place? Then, by combining GIS and BIM, it also bridges the gap between GIS, which is known as Geographic Information Systems, and BIM, which is Building Information Modeling. It enables us to stream authoritative layers such as flood risks, bike infrastructure, zoning directly onto the live 3D massing model. It also gives us immediate insight, which then helps us to understand the constraints of the site better. So instead of waiting for a consultant to send through a report, perhaps, which would be more detailed, um, the designer would have access to the data that is available on ArcGIS. And this then allows us to understand the bigger picture of the site before specific design work even begins. We can also spot opportunities and challenges, like identifying a wind tunnel while we are still shaping the blocks and the streets. And in Cape Town, where I am located, that is quite a challenge that we have. Often buildings go up and then it creates a wind tunnel, and then the spaces between these buildings become quite unbearable. So, using this method could alleviate situations like that from occurring. Okay. So, looking at the objectives of this webinar. So, firstly, we look to understand what Forma site design is, uh, what ArcGIS is. Then we also look to understand how the two softwares integrate. And lastly, we look at the benefits for urban designers, planners, and architects with early pre-design work. And it's quite important to note that this is Forma site design, which we are focusing on now. Um, and that Forma building design will be released later. Okay, so in this section, we will look at what is Autodesk Forma site design by defining what the software is and the value proposition, which unpacks how the software can aid you during your urban analysis phase. Okay, so Forma site design. To firstly understand Forma site design, we need to understand its place within the Autodesk Common Data Environment ecosystem. Um, as we all know, projects generally have four stages within its life cycle. The planning phase, when a project feasibility is analyzed. The design phase, when the building starts being conceptualized and finalized in terms of the design. The construction phase is when the contractors commence the on-site construction, and the operations phase is when the building owner takes occupancy of the building. During each phase, Autodesk has designed software for the various stakeholders involved with each stage. As you can see on the diagram, Autodesk Forma site design serves as the planning tool. However, Forma site design also integrates with Revit, and you can take the Revit models back into Forma site design for further analysis or massing design alterations if need be. So Autodesk Forma can also be or is defined as a cloud-based workspace with a set of capabilities dedicated to early stage urban planning, massing, and environmental analysis. So let's look at the key value proposition, right? So the challenge with pre-design studies is that it was often done on different software packages, which meant information would get lost in translation. So Forma is specifically created for pre-design studies, which allows urban designers, architects to just focus on analyzing the site conditions, but also the impact of the contextual informants. And this is really what's great about Forma. Is that you're not just working in isolation of your site, but you're also understanding the contextual impact. When analyzing a specific site or developing massing footprints for a proposed design, Autodesk Forma automatically begins to generate live data relating to the site areas. And this information is crucial when one needs to understand the feasibility of a project early on. It gives you the areas for the site, for the building massing, and simultaneously also all the landscape interventions such as your landscaping areas, your plazas, and also your parking. It also allows designers to understand the environmental impact, economic feasibility, and then the social impact. By including interoperability function, early stage data gathering is preserved. The Revit export functionality allows geospatial data to be maintained and is also remains consistent during the project. This largely eliminates the manual project setup requirements. Forma also works well with the range of powerful extensions, mainly ArcGIS, which we will be covering later on in this webinar. So now let's have a look at the Forma capabilities. Okay. So in this section of Forma capabilities, we will just look at the rapid massing function, real-time simulation, and the extensions available to users. Okay. So with rapid massing capabilities, users can sketch complex mixed-use developments. They can define the volumes and the surfaces within minutes. Users can use the line building sketch tool as illustrated in the video, which is a predefined sketch line tool. The tool also allows for amendments to be made once the massing has been placed. Users can change the height or the width or the length of the line or the massing that has been drawn. Alternatively, users can also use other sketch tools which give users more freedom with the form. And once the mass has been specified, users can specify the amount of floors required, the function of the floor, and by including contextual information, designers can understand the relationship with the context and also where shadows will fall on the neighboring buildings since it has geolocation functionality. Users are not just limited to defining the mass but can also specify the amount of floors, um, the height between the floors, the functionality of each floor, which is quite important for early feasibility studies. This can easily help developers or building owners understand what will be the financial impact of the building on the site. Just by having something like this, which does not require a, a lot of information, where in Revit you would need very specific information to set out the building. And Forma takes a lot of those challenges away just to make it quite user friendly, but also just to allow designers and stakeholders just to understand the initial impact of the design. When we look at real-time simulation, as you make changes to the design, the data updates instantly. The key native analysis include your sunlight analysis, your daylight analysis, and this is for and then also optimizing for solar panel potential and positioning. And then also when you're looking at daylighting, it also looks at the quality of lighting that you will receive inside apartments. Then we've also got the wind and microclimate analysis. So with this, you can identify wind tunnels, and you can also assess the perceived temperature in and around the building, basically. So it helps you understand where what the temperatures are, but that also then allows you to understand, okay, perhaps because this area becomes quite hot, we can have a design intervention here where we perhaps change the surface of the space, where we perhaps introduce soft landscaping instead of hard landscaping. And then this just generally are things that you can take from it. Then we also have the operational energy. So this predicts the carbon impact early on in the design life cycle. And once you've started exploring the massing and the layout options, you can perform a quick analysis to understand the impact of the design on the site and simultaneously on neighboring buildings, because software also allows you to analyze a selected portion of the site, as we can see over here, or you can focus on the entirety of the site if need be. So it all depends on what the needs are for the analysis, um, because that will then just really give you the information you need going forward. So now we're going to look at the extensions. So the Forma supports third-party extensions. So for example, you've got TestFit. And TestFit is a plugin which allows you to calculate your parking requirements for residential or commercial designs. It allows you to do the layouts. It automatically generates the layouts for you. And by simply clicking on the Add button, you can add this extension to your workspace. Then if you further on, you can see we've got the environmental terrain analysis extension. So this just helps you understand the terrain environment that you're working on. And as easy as that, you click add and then it's been added. And then we're looking at ArcGIS, which is also quite helpful and informative. So this is just capturing all your ArcGIS layer data and bringing that into Autodesk Forma projects. Okay, so and then as explained, to add an extension, you simply click on the add extension tab, you click on the extension you want and you say add, and then the extension will be part of your project and ready for use. And then once you've added it, it will appear on your extension tab on the left hand side, as you can see. And then to activate it, you simply click on the extension that you need. Okay, so now that we've covered the capabilities of Forma, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how we start a project in Autodesk Forma, because this is quite important. Okay, so what we're going to do over here now, so what I've done on my end is I've gone to the Autodesk Forma website. I've said create new project, and then what you can do, so it says create new ACC project. Then you can define the hub where you want it. In this instance, I'm just going to put it on my personal hub. And then you can also specify the name of the project, which is quite important because this will help you differentiate. So because I'm located in Cape Town, I've just said CT underscore Grand Parade, and that is where my project will be located. Obviously, depending on your office naming conventions, that will determine how you name your project. So once we've done that, so then the next tab that pops up is we have a page where, or we have a pop-up dialog, which allows us to invite members. So here we can invite our colleagues, and then we can also control the permissions. Are they a manager? Are they an editor? Are they a viewer? What is the permissions you want to give them? I haven't added anyone, so that is fine. So what you see here is it just shows you then an overview of the project members. So because I haven't invited anyone, the only person that you'll see there is myself. Then it also shows me my project access and also my permissions as well. And then the project can also be accessed through ACC. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so once you've set up the project, uh, the important thing there is to ensure that you understand, firstly, what the function of the project is. So once you've defined your site, you can locate that. So let's just go back here quickly. Okay, let's just play this. Okay. So what I'm going to do over here now is I'm going to specify the site. I've set Cape Town as I've specified Cape Town as my site. I'm going to zoom into the area which I intend to work on. So what I'm also defining now is the contextual information that I require for my project. So I'm confirming that map size. So you as a designer will obviously determine how much context you require for your design. In some instances, if you're doing a large urban design scheme, then the context might be much larger. If you're working on a small residential project, then you might just want the immediate context of your building. So you just perhaps want to see your neighbors, and then the neighbors opposite you in the same street, but you wouldn't require an entire city block like what we have uh, done over here. And depending on the size of the area which you define, that will also determine um, the waiting period in terms of Forma putting that terrain together for you. So your internet speed is quite important when setting this up, because the slower your internet is, the slower it then takes to put everything together. But with faster internet, then it becomes faster. If your site is big, it also then impacts all of that. So what I'm doing over here now is I'm adding data to my site. Okay, so you, depending on your project, you will look at the available data over here. Then you'll see what is important and what you require. So generally what I do is I take the package, which includes my roads and then my buildings as well. Those are quite important for me. And then you can also add your base maps. You can either add the one which is slightly grayed out, which is not too powerful as a background, or you can add the satellite image background. It all depends on your specificities. You can also look at the trees, which is quite helpful just to understand where the greenery is in your city. So if your city has mapped out its trees, the positioning of it, all of that information will come through. So now I've loaded in all of the data that I require, and now you can see I have my site here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define my site limit. Okay, so at the bottom I'm going to change my view to a 2D view from 3D, and I'm purposefully just missing the tree there because I'd like to preserve the trees. Uh, and then I will just continue to define my site area. Okay. And then once I am happy with that, then I'll just say enter. What's quite nice is I've drawn up the site and the site area data already becomes available. So it's automatically creating the data which you require for your early stage feasibility. You want to understand the site metrics, you want to understand the building metrics, you also want to understand how this building sits within its traffic, in its context. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use the line tool. Let me just change my orientation slightly a bit. Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to use the line tool and I'm going to draw the footprint of the building basically how I want it, the extent. Okay, and then as you can see there on the right hand side of my cursor, I also get a dynamic input where I can specify the length and the angle. So over here on the bottom right, I have the option to specify the height of the building with the floors and also the floor to floor level. So now what I'm going to do is I've used the line tool. I'm just going to change the floors. You see it, so you can see there how I can adjust the amount of floors I require. I can change the length of the sections, or I can change the width of the building. So even once you've drawn something, it's not set in stone. You can still make alterations to it, which is great. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the basic modeling tool. And the reason I'm taking the basic modeling tool is that it really allows me to define the footprint, and it's not just fixed to a rectangular shape. Okay, so I'm just going to draw the outline of this quickly, just based on some early design thoughts that I had when I looked at the site. Okay, okay, let's just put that there. Taking a bit long here. Okay, that's there. I'll put that there. Okay, and then I'll just have that there, and then you can see it snaps there as well. Okay, so if I go to 3D, usually what also happens is you can also dictate the height of the building, right? But because I've already clicked, it does not give me that options, but I can select it and then I can define the floors. So I want this building to be a high rise, which blends well with the context. So really to create a, a work or a design that has a hybrid of tall buildings, but also your lower scale buildings. Okay. So now that I've got that in place, you can already see that my area information has already started updating. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to define the functions of the floors, right? So the first few floors of my high-rise building, I want that to be commercial spaces, okay? And then for the neighboring building, I also want that to be commercial spaces. But the floors above the first three on the high rise, I want those to be residential blocks. So I'll switch that and I'll change that to residential. Um, these are the predefined occupancy types, but you can add additional types if you require. Okay, so I've got that all set up. I can see that I can also make changes to my terrain landscaping. I can add additional volumes, sketches, roads, and I can really just extend the site limits if I need to. And what you can see here on the right hand side, if I look at my site area, that my areas have all began updating as well. Okay, let's move on. So now we're going to look at the ArcGIS intelligence layer. So firstly, what we're going to do is we're going to define GIS. We're going to look at what is ArcGIS, and then we're going to look at importing ArcGIS layers into Autodesk Forma site design. Okay, so defining GIS. So GIS stands for Geographic Information System. Um, in the context of the sources, GIS is also described as a system for understanding the real world context of a project. It involves layering different types of data over a specific location to understand how they interact. Instead of looking at a flat drawing, GIS allows you to see the physical traits. So you can look at this can be defined as the terrain, the slopes, and the elevation. Then the environmental traits. This can be defined as the vegetation, the rivers, the floodplains, and then also regulatory traits, which is basically our zoning for the building sites, and then also the regulation requirements for that specific site. So with every zoning, there's obviously land use rights. So that becomes quite important. Then also social traits. So you can have your demographics, the income maps, or population density, and this is quite important to understand when designing. So as we can see with the diagram on the right, you have your real world at the bottom, right? Um, and we see it all in a, how can I say this, in a combined setting, so we don't see the layers. But when looking at it through the ArcGIS lens, we can then see the land use layers. We can see the elevation, which is basically your terrains. We can see our land parcels. We can see our streets. We can see our customers and how these things overlap with one another. So depending on which data you require, it will then begin to impact how your map comes together. So data layers like these are usually provided by governments, so for their own research. And then GIS can also be viewed as a technology that allows us to move from designing in a vacuum to designing with deep insights into the site's conditions. And this is quite important for urban planners, urban designers, and architects because all of the design decisions that are made impacts the real world. It impacts how people interact with the building or with the urban space. So it's quite important to understand the dynamics of this space. So what is ArcGIS? So ArcGIS is a software platform developed by Esri. It is considered the global standard for mapping and spatial analysis, and it also provides you with authoritative data. So when we use ArcGIS, we aren't just drawing lines, we are tapping into a vast library called ArcGIS, Living Atlas of the World. And this contains verified global data assets. ArcGIS functionality allows users to overlay different layers of information onto a map canvas to create data-rich drawings. So public agencies and governments typically upload specific or data specific to local municipalities or government entities. In my instance, I am based in Cape Town, and whenever I'm searching for data layers, I will typically find that the data has been uploaded by City of Cape Town. Then we also have design teams, which are basically the users, which upload and curate their own specific data, which can be curated in the ArcGIS desktop app and uploaded to the ArcGIS online. This can then be pulled into Forma project. So as a design team, you can also do your own analysis and then upload this data and information that is perhaps specific to your team or your project that you find valuable that you might not have found anywhere. So this also allows teams to use data that you have accumulated over the past years to supplement global data assets. So something that has become quite common in Cape Town, or not common, but good habit is tracking informality. So tracking perhaps where informal traders set up shop. This is perhaps something that was not tracked as regularly as perhaps, let's say, your landscaped areas and stuff like that. So understanding how informality functions and how it relates to the existing environment and also how users interact with that. So that becomes really important. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll look at importing layers into ArcGIS. So what I've done is I've switched off my building layers because typically, or what I found happens is I would sometimes import layers and they would be positioned below the building. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to um, add my ArcGIS extension. I'm just going to say agree. I'm going to add it, just give it a second, and then there it pops up. So I'll close that. So now I'll just click on that extension and I'll have this ArcGIS for Autodesk Forma pop up. So I'll add my layers, and as I said previously, I know the city of Cape Town uploads, so I will just search for Cape Town, and I've noticed through all of those other categories it doesn't come up, but ArcGIS Online gives me layers related to Cape Town. Then what I'm doing over there is I have specified ArcGIS to only show me layers that are specific to my site. So now what I'm looking for is informal trading. Okay, so let's just see here. Okay, so there I can see that I have informal trading base, informal trading location. I will take that one, and we can see that it says features in site 8. So now I've loaded that in, and there, let me just look. Okay, let me just minimize this. There I can see that layer was loaded. So that is demarcating the area where informal traders typically set up. And then over on this stretch as well. And we can see that it's just giving us the outlines of it, but this is sufficient for now because we just need to understand where the informal traders are located. Okay, let's go back and let's add another layer. So this time we'll look at the My City bus route. So this is the public transport bus, which is quite okay. Okay, so yeah, the My City bus, it's quite well known and quite widely used. It's either My City or golden arrows that the people typically use. But now I can begin to see where the bus route actually goes. So it does not give me specific data in terms of which route is which, but it just shows me where the bus is going down, which is sufficient for me to understand right now. So I can see in and around my site there is a bus route. So this is something that I can take into consideration when perhaps making alterations to my design. So, okay, let's change this. I want to have some contours as well because I think this is quite important for me. Um, okay, I found my 5 meter contours and then it shows there that I have features in the site 12. Uh, okay, so that will take some time to load, which is fine. Okay. One thing to also note, so previously I've also tried to add the bus stop data, but those are actual dots and that information does not work so well with Forma yet. But I do believe that it is something that they are working on and looking to improve. Yeah, I can see my contour lines. You can see it looks a little bit different to what my site terrain actually looks like. So you can see there is some discrepancy between the contours and then the terrain which was loaded in, but that is fine. Okay, so now let me just go. I want to put some zoning information on. Let's just see how this comes on. And then features in site, there's quite a bit, so I believe that this will take quite some time to actually load in, but that's fine. Okay, there we go. So now I can see the footprint of the properties. Okay, and then let's also just try this one, urban development zones. It's only one feature, but I'm not exactly sure where it is. But okay, it has loaded it in, but okay, that's fine. I think I've got enough to work with here. Let me just go back to let me just switch on my buildings quickly. Okay, that's fine. So we can see our buildings now. And then I just need to switch on my extension again just to show how my layers sit. Okay, I'm just going to minimize this. One thing that you can also do, so if there are layers that you want to import into Forma, you can also do that. So then it becomes native to Forma and it's not loaded in through the ArcGIS extension. And then this can also help you if you want to modify it later in Revit and so onwards. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of how we can import layers, okay, we can move on. So the question now becomes, what do we actually do with these layers? That's quite important to understand. So having the layers is one thing, right? But also utilizing those layers is another important aspect. So in this section, we're going to look at the urban analysis deep dive. We will demo how the environmental and urban analysis functionality work, and this is all based on what we've already done. Okay, let's go. So what I've done in the meantime is I've added some landscaping to to the plaza between my buildings, and I really wanted this just to be a urban plaza for the users, for the pedestrians as well that walk by. Then I've also added some parking using the test fit extension. Okay, so now you can see if I click on my analysis area, right? I've switched it to buildings. Now I can see all of the different areas, how it's updated, my net internal area, my gross internal area, and then my gross floor area. This data is all updated, and then it's also split into categories depending on the building function. Units, I do not have any residential office units specified, so nothing appeared there. But in my parking data, I can see there that it does pick up the parking. Okay, so there it also shows me generic and it was automated. So I've put down that parking, but if I click on my test fit parking extension, I can also play with the parking constraints. So perhaps I want to increase my turn radius because it's a truck or whatever, or I need to increase the road width between parkings just so that users can get out easier. Then I can also look at the distribution of the surfaces. So the gray is basically the areas that will be developed. If I click on this, then I can then also look at what it is looking at. So it says buildings, and then parkings is what it's showing. Then in the green, I can look at the vegetation. So that is the proposed landscaping of the urban plaza. And then the unassigned is the remaining land, which is undeveloped, right? So it's quite important to understand these metrics because this will just then help the owner to understand, okay, these are the cost implications because we have so much area of landscaping, so much area of building. These are the heights of the building, right? So they will just be able to do a cost per square meter analysis of that, which is great. And that will help them with their financials early on in the design project. Okay, so over here on the analysis tab, we have the different types of analysis. We have daylight, sunlight, we have wind analysis, microclimate analysis, noise analysis, solar energy, embodied carbon analysis, shadow study, and then extensions, which also do additional analysis. Okay, so I'm going to select the daylight potential analysis. So in the, we will see that is the output that we'll typically get. We can define the analysis area either to have it within the site limit or we can say the entire model. Obviously, if you say entire model, the analysis will take slightly longer. If you say that you only want the analysis to be specific to your site or your buildings, then that will be considerably shorter. And it's all dependent on what you need and the size of your scheme. If we look at the wind analysis, we can then specify a circle basically where it begins to analyze the wind conditions in that area. We can also specify that radius. We can say custom circle or set a limit. Then if we do that, we'll see that it slightly increases. So this will just help you understand, okay, but if we have this form or this building footprint, then it actually begins to impact the wind flow in this area. So it might create a wind tunnel. So then how do we break that up? So now we can say, okay, we just want to analyze, that's fine. And then we can go to our microclimate analysis over there. So similarly with the wind, we can also select the radius. So what the microclimate analysis is, it just helps us understand the the temperature in and around the building. So it will look at the heat of the or the temperature of the surfaces of your roofs as well, which is quite important. So in that instance, as previously mentioned, then you can perhaps say that the way you treat this surface is different to the way you treat another surface. So if you know if it's going to be hot, you perhaps put landscaping in there to break up that hard surface and add some greenery to it, be it a row of trees. Once you are done with your analysis and your design layouts, then you can take it into your layout boards. So on your layout boards, you can, uh, if you click on site design, so I've initiated a second proposal, but I did not finish it, but that's fine. So if I go to proposal one, I can see my design view. I can see my area metrics, my microclimate, my wind, and then also my daylight potential. I can drag and drop, and then I can also enlarge the size, right? So over here, I've just gone there and I've said design view, and then I've gone in there, I've dragged it, similar with my area metrics, and then all my analysis, I've dragged those across as well. Okay, and then what I've done here below is I've taken a plan view. So I've just taken that plan view and I've made 3 copies of it, and then I've added a transparency layer to it, because the intent of this is to really do an analysis and to understand. So it's as, or as a designer, when doing pre-design, or let's say early on design investigations, it's one thing to have the layers and the information, but what you really want to do is say, okay, what does this information actually mean? How does it benefit my site? Or what negative impact does it have on my site? What considerations do I need to make, and so onwards. So what I've done is I've just overlaid some sketches um, onto that plan, and I've said, okay, perhaps these are areas that I can target with pedestrian movement, with this green core. It's like saying, okay, yes, I've inserted a building into this public plaza space, but now how do I allow the building and this urban, or this plaza core, to become a blend between public and private, so it still allows that accessibility and so onwards. And then also I've perhaps added parking there, but because my ArcGIS layers gave me insight to the bus routes, um, I could then understand that I do not need to provide as much parking for that area because I've got public transport. So not as many, let's say, workers or pedestrians will be traveling by their personal cars, but they might be traveling with public transport, be it the bus, the train, or the taxi, which is quite common. So, okay, let's go on then. So you can also, if you've got a Revit file, you can say docs and you can then add that file into this drawing. You can go to specific view of it. You can add additional text as well. So let me just zoom in here. Ah, it zoomed out slightly. Okay, let me just type something here quickly. So this text function is quite neat and handy because you can make notes on your layout. So you can perhaps say that, okay, we need to look at the facade, or we need to take note of this bus route, or this is a heritage building over here, so we need to just be cognizant of how we deal with that, because that's quite important. So we add those notes. Once we're done, then we just say enter. You can move it around. Then you can also use the pen tool and you can draw arrows perhaps if you say, okay, no, but okay, I'm going to add a note. This note applies to there, but that note actually, yeah, it's perfect there. Then I can also add a revision cloud. So I can do various shapes, but I'm just going to do the revision cloud quickly. Then I can also assign a color to it. I can define a full color as well, which is quite helpful. Then I can also decide the page sizes of my layouts. So I'm going to stick with the layout I have now. I can add images or media which are external, so media that's perhaps on my computer, on my device, I can add that. I can also add comments. So if you're sharing this with a colleague, there's 3 or 4 of your colleagues perhaps working on this, and then you've asked the other colleagues to have a look at it. You can comment, add your comment, and then you can review it later as well. So this is just something I've put down there. Okay, please review this facade. Consider adding balconies. Okay, so there you can see the comments come up. So I can just position that to where I want it. There's quite a bit of flexibility in that. And then I can also edit the presentation. So That's the one layout board based on proposal one that I've done. Okay, so I've got that sorted. You can obviously add more layouts as your design develops or as you increase your analysis or various proposals. So now I'm going to create the second board. The second board could also be useful for your second proposal. It's just loading this board quickly. Okay, there we go. So this is just the introductory board, which they typically have when you open a new one. And here you can see what it typically looks like. So this is what the the intention of the software is. It, it wants users to actually utilize the software to its capabilities. You can also see that you can include video links here, what they've done. Then they've made markups on these drawings and so onwards. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of the environmental and urban analysis, we can understand how Forma together with ArcGIS really allows designers um, the space to create, but not just create in a silo, but also create in an ecosystem, which then works well with things like your Revit, and also it allows information to be retained as the project continues. Okay, so that's done. So let's look at the takeaways now. So this is now closing. So we will look at the seamless handover benefits, the three E's, and then also our final takeaway. Okay, so with a seamless handover, the problem in traditional workflows, uh, typically when you move from the concept model to a production model, um, it's often destructive to all of that early analysis that has been done. So designers frequently have to rebuild the site manually, setting the coordinates and hoping the terrain matches. This is quite a well-known problem. So the solution which is proposed here with this collaboration is that the integration between Forma and ArcGIS solves this by preserving geospatial accuracy. When the concept is validated, the model is exported directly to Revit. One thing to also note is to utilize the ArcGIS plugin within Autodesk Forma, you need to have a ArcGIS license, right? Okay. So if we look at the return on investment also, because the data loss is reduced, simply because the model first lets georeference, so it lands in the exact same location, the correct terrain elevation, infrastructure layers, and no repositioning of or manual data entry is required. It also just creates continuity in terms of a seamless transition where environmental logic um, is established in the concept phase, uh, is carried through right to the project into the detailed design and construction phase. So the information is not lost or forgotten, but it is continually um, maintained. So if we look at the three E's, the workflow also empowers planning decisions that balance three critical factors. So, firstly, ecology. So, this is your environmental resilience. So, by integrating layers like your floor plane lines or floodplain lines or local the vegetation, designs are adapted to the environment rather than fighting against it. This leads to projects that manage stormwater better, reduce energy consumption through passive ventilation. Then we have the equity, which is our social impact. So, using data like pedestrian connectivity and informal trader maps ensure that the design benefits the broader community. It allows planners to verify that they are creating accessible, fair, and human centric urban spaces. If we're looking at the economy, so the financial savings, this is the most direct financial return of investment. So, by evaluating outcomes before breaking ground, teams identify fatal flaws, perhaps like a wind tunnel, zoning violation, or floodplain. Um, and in this instance, it still cheaper to fix it while it's in the digital phase rather than in the construction phase. This significantly reduces the costly rework and change orders, and speeds up the design construction process. Also eliminates issues that might only occur on site. Okay, so final takeaway. So by moving away from reactive design, where we draw the buildings and then check if it breaks any rules, to proactive design, where the rules and the constraints help generate the form and ensure all stakeholder, meaning your clients, your local authority requirements are met. Um, we also design with confidence because we are informed, and this speeds up the design process as well. It allows teams to test multiple iterations in the time it used to take to create one, making decisions faster and more decisive. So there's also an element of trust which is added. So clients and stakeholders are more likely to approve projects when they see compelling visuals backed by real world data and an analysis of that actual data rather than just abstract concepts. So, if we look at the vision, ultimately integrating Autodesk Forma and ArcGIS ensures that site data is not an afterthought but a foundation. It also allows us to save time, reduce risk, and create urban spaces that are resilient, sustainable, and truly loved by their communities. Okay. Thank you for joining the webinar. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us here at Micrographics. I hope you have found this webinar informative. If you haven't subscribed, please do so and don't forget to like and hit the notification bell for future webinars. Thank you again and goodbye.